So my job title is Director of Photography for National Geographic Travel. So that means I take care of pictures for Traveler Magazine and Travel Online. And this year was the 30th year of Traveler Magazine. And we had the great experience of going through 30 years worth of magazines to pick the photographs that we remembered over those years. And it was really surprising. It was a great experience. Some of the speakers here, Bob Christ and Susan Soybert, their pictures are some of the ones that we selected. And so I thought I would just give you a little presentation of the photos we love at Traveler Magazine and why we like them. Now you might notice that some of these pictures are a little bit rougher maybe than what we think would be a quote-unquote good picture, because we really love interesting pictures. I think sometimes the emotional impact of the photograph is what's more important to us at National Geographic than some of the other aspects. I'm going to take a second to plug in this remote. Okay. So here, what do we like about the pictures? We like pictures that have a sense of place, particularly at Traveler Magazine. National Geographic Traveler seeks to put readers into the destinations we travel to. We like defining light. Photographs speak through the light, and light defines the mood and feeling of the place. And most importantly, travel is made up of moments that reshape our lives, things that happen to us and around us. So as photographs, we want to see what does the place look like, but we also want to see what did it feel like to be there. A number of years ago, Steve McCurry, we asked him about his favorite place to travel. And he said Taj Mahal. And we kind of looked at him sideways like, well, that's, isn't that sort of obvious, Steve? And he said, no, really, if you haven't been there, it's a great place. So we asked him to go shoot a new picture for us of Taj Mahal. And this photograph was done back in the days of film. And I remember looking through the pictures and coming across this scene. And I thought, well, I like that, but I can't really run a picture of the Taj Mahal upside down, can I? And I kept taking the pictures that he pulled back a little bit further. And when we finally got down to choosing the last photo, this really was the one. And I thought, it's really interesting to think about the intentionality of the photograph and not get too worked up about rules. Another picture that we really liked was Will Van Overbeck followed a writer to Nashville. Now, the other thing about Traveler Magazine is that the photographs that we want to tell stories with the photographs, and we really want the writers to bring back good stories to us. So the writer for this story, Pat Kelly, called us up, and he said, I want to, usually we'll get writers or photographers call, and they say, well, you should do a story on Nashville. And we would say, okay, fine, why? Why should you do that story for us? And so what Pat Kelly did was he called us up, and he said, I want to go to Nashville, and I wrote a country song, and it's called Moon Pies and Ribeyes. And I had my friends record it in Austin, Texas, and we're going to go to Nashville and try to convince some A&R man to listen to it and give us a recording contract. And we thought, well, that's never going to happen, but it'll make a great story, right? So the photographer Will Van Overbeck went with Pat Kelly to try to make this happen. And so this is my favorite photo that Will was able to get there in Nashville. And how does a photographer get a photograph like this? He's not just walking down the street and he happens to see this couple and he picks up his camera and he snaps a shot and then he leaves. Usually this requires scouting. One afternoon you go by and you try to decide, okay, when the light gets good, where am I going to be? Where am I going to, good light is this valuable currency, and you've got to decide what you're going to spend it on. And so Will decided that at twilight at this street it would be fantastic. A lot of us know that twilight is really good for landscape. We don't realize it works just as well for these city pictures. And so then the way Will typically works is he'll walk down a street and he'll find interesting people. And he'll stop those people in a conversation will be something like this, I'm doing a story on Nashville, and I think you guys look great. You really look like what I think Nashville should look like. May I take your picture? And so that starts out, and sometimes you can get a portrait that way, but then Will just is patient, and then he just waits. And he waits, and he waits until those people forget that he's there, and their life returns to normal, and he gets these really natural moments. One thing I particularly like about this picture is that it's shot at the time of day, the one time of day when the neon lights and the light on the street are the same exposure. So the whole photograph, and then the additional thing that he's added in this picture. At this time of day, you can also see inside the club. And you catch this girl, you know, with a little sidelong glance, wishing that was her boyfriend. Cotton Colson and Cece Brimberg, they're a couple of photographers, a husband and wife. They spend a great deal of time on the Lindblad expeditions, and they shoot a lot of pictures for us. We really love what they do for us in the cities. And so this is the picture. Cotton actually took this picture in Warsaw. And you might think, well, why? This is a picture of, like a blurry picture of a window. But Cotton and Cece, they understand that we want the viewer of the picture to feel like they could be there too. And so instead of leaning out the window and shooting a postcard perfect picture of the street, they take the shot from like when you are lying back in your bed, looking out the window, having the experience of being in Warsaw, not just taking a picture of Warsaw. Catherine Carnow did this picture in Majorca. She's sitting down, having lunch with somebody. She didn't choose just anybody. She goes to the place. She finds out who are the people that typify this place. Who do I need to meet that will tell me about this place and show me the real beauty of this place, what the people think and what they do. And so she's having dinner, and at some moment she just decides, I want to show what it's like to have lunch with this guy. Don't we all want to be sitting there? I think a lot of us might. That's the kind of thing we want in a picture. I was sent to Anticosti Island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River to shoot a story about what a beautiful place it is to visit. Now, this is one of those places where there's 100 times as many deer as people there. And I was staying at this hotel, and every morning and every evening when I looked out, I would see this lighthouse. And I started to formulate a plan that the lighthouse would probably look pretty nice near sunset when the sun started to go down. But, you know, how many pictures do we need of lighthouses? I wanted something just a little bit more. And so I noticed also that every afternoon the deer would come up and they would start to wander around this little grassy meadow by the lighthouse. And so that was really easy. I had everything I needed put together. All I had to do was sit down in the grass for 4 hours until the deer turned their head just so. For me, I love tiny little details in a picture that make it one step extra. You know, it's not the fact that the deer in the foreground, you can see both of his antlers and both of his ears, and that the deer in the background, as soon as he turned his head to look at me like that, I thought, oh, that's kind of like those Hartford insurance ads. And, you know, there are visual icons that we all recognize from our lives in the world. And if we can grab a little piece of those icons and use them in our photograph, I think it'll make the photograph communicate a little bit better. Michael Melford was doing a story on the Georgia Sea Islands. And this is a little bit about just paying attention to where you are and what it looks like. You can imagine what this place looks like from a canoe. It's very interesting. It's a lot of marshy grass. There's a lot of mud. But as Michael was going along through here, he realized there was a pattern. And he wondered, what would it look like from up above? So he called me up and he said, Dan, you know, we don't do this very much anymore, but I'm gonna just hire an aerial flight to shoot this estuary. And it just is, it's beautiful from the air. And he had the vision to realize from the ground what it was going to look like to spend that extra money to get a shot from the air. Susan Soybert shot this picture for a story for us on Barbados. This is a great example of the way that a lot of the photographers work. It's like what I talked about with Will, is the photographers, we like to find a stage that is set. And then we just wait for something to happen. And so she'll show you a little bit more about this, but it's just perfect. All these people lying there waiting to learn to surf. Susan is a surfer. She knows they have to learn, what do they call this? The pop? Pop up. And so she knows something's going to happen, but she has no idea it's going to be just one guy. And it makes the picture symmetrical. It all works out perfect. So this is a picture that I shot on the way to the North Pole. In D.C., when I'm in the office, I ride my bike to work. And so year-round, whatever the weather, I ride my bike to work just because I'm allergic to people and I don't like to get on the metro. And I'll never forget one November morning, and it was one of those mornings when it was 31 degrees and raining outside. And I had ridden my bike to work, and I was just soaked like a rat and freezing. And I came around the corner, and here came my editor and a writer, and they were crossing the crosswalk right at the moment that I got there. And my editor looked up at me, and he goes, "Oh, Dan, you like cold? Bernice, tell him what you just told me." And Bernice just described this trip that you could take. It's called skiing the last degree to the North Pole. And it's not too many people have the chance to do this, but the Russians, they drop you off at 89 degrees north latitude, and then you ski for what ends up being about 100 miles, because every 2 miles you go forward, you drift back about a half mile. And I thought, well, great, that'd be fantastic. Let me do this. And then I started to think about it, and I realized, wait, there's nothing there. I'm going to take a picture of nothing. And so I was thinking, what kind of photo possibilities would I have? So for the people that are sort of gear hounds here, I realized that although a fisheye lens is not my favorite lens to use, that in a place like this where the landscape was very plain and uninterrupted, I thought it would be helpful if I could get closer than normal to my fellow participants. And so in this case, I used a fisheye lens to be literally inches from this guy climbing over the pressure ridges. And then a little trick photographically for a fisheye lens so that it doesn't look like you used a fisheye lens. If you leave the horizon in the center, then you won't get that swoopy bend. Because as a photo editor, I can't look past a fisheye lens fast enough. Usually people use it for the effect, and you might get one picture in your whole life that you can put in your portfolio with a fisheye. But if you know how to cleverly use it and not use it for its gimmickiness, but use it for its utility, it's a great tool. It was cold up there, I might say. Ken Kochi did this picture for a story on ethnic neighborhoods in the United States, that you could get a feeling of being in another country by being in a neighborhood. Bob, your brother, wrote this story. Bob, Chris' brother, Gary, wrote the story about it. And so when Ken Kochi was in Chicago, he thought about this Pilsen neighborhood. What is the nature of the neighborhood? Well, it's the closest you could be in Illinois anyway, probably most of the United States, to being in Mexico. So he looked around until he found this guy who to him represented a very charming Mexican. And then he just had to take his picture. And so we'll talk a lot about these photographs and portraits and what make them interesting, but it usually comes down to the eyes. Not direct eye contact, but some magic little sparkle. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but when it works, it works. Dawn Kish sold us this picture out of her portfolio. I still don't understand where she was standing or why or how she did not get run over. But that tension is what makes this picture really extraordinary. And so we had seen it in her portfolio, and the next time we needed to do a story in Vietnam, we just needed a single picture to illustrate it. We called her up and said, "Hey, you know that picture? Send it to us." Catherine Carnell suggested to us to do a story on the lost coast of California, the northern coast. And this is the kind of light that when we talk about the photographers love twilight. This is the sort of light. You know, you can dissect this picture. What happens is because the beach is black, there's not a lot of bounce from the light. It's just the very last rays of light. This girl's actually lit by the sky and not the light, but it's just, you find a beautiful subject, and in beautiful light, you put the two things together. What could be better? When you're photographing a pub in Cornwall, England, you find a guy that looks like he belongs in a pub in Cornwall, England, and you photograph him by the window. What we want is photographs of real people. A lot of what the photographers do is they go around and they look for interesting subjects to photograph. They look for interesting people to talk to. They go from one person to the next till they find the person that represents that place. Ken Kochi did this picture at the Spanish Steps in Rome. This picture was interesting on a number of levels. In Traveler magazine, we don't usually run black and white photographs. And for this one, Ken shot a lot of photos in black and white and a lot of pictures in color. And the managing editor at the time wasn't crazy about the black and white photos. He thought that Some of the better photos were in black and white, and he really felt hurt that Ken had forced our hands by making better pictures in black and white and not as good pictures in color. But he just didn't want to look at any of the, so he told us, don't use the black and white pictures at all. That's not fair. We're just going to use the color pictures. I don't like what he did to us. So when the designer and I sat down to do the layout, we decided that we would do every other page color and black and white and color and black and white. And when we presented the layout, then it made sense, and the editor forgot that he'd told us to not use the black and white pictures. Now, I love to think about this picture. I come back to this picture in my mind all the time, because if I were taking this picture, I would feel like, oh, I failed horribly. Why couldn't I get that guy in focus, right? Like, what's the matter? But really, it's not a picture of this particular individual. It's a picture of the Spanish Steps, of the scene at midday that is the Spanish Steps. And that's what's in focus in the picture. I've also, this picture made me think about those kind of issues. And so when I'm photographing, you can bet that I'll shoot a picture with the guy in focus, with the person out of focus. You shoot it both ways. And then when you come back, you choose which one worked. I'm the photo editor, right? That's the way I would think. I don't know that Ken was thinking that way. I think this guy really just literally appeared in the frame and he snapped the picture and then he moved on. Now, if you look at pictures from 100 years ago, shot with view cameras, and you start to pay attention to historical pictures, you'll see a lot of pictures like this because it takes so long to set up. And when the photographer gets a photo, focused on the boat out in the ocean in the background and something happens to make the picture a little bit interesting, I think maybe at the time those pictures might have been mistakes. But I would argue that those are the pictures that historically have been kept because they added 2 layers of information. Anytime that a picture has more than just a single layer of information, I think that makes it a better photo. So the other thing that everybody always asks me about when I show the photographs is, why do you have the horizon crooked? And so there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is because when I was a young newspaper photographer, the layout editors were older and more experienced, and they would slap our wrists for taking pictures with crooked horizons. And so now that my generation is in charge, we can put crooked horizons whenever we want, right? The truth of the matter is, if you look at this photograph and you try to analyze the composition, it does a very good job of filling the entire frame of the photograph. If you took the camera and tilted it to the left so that the horizon was perfectly straight, that puts the church steeples up in the upper right-hand corner. And what happens is the left-hand corner of the picture just becomes empty, nothing there. And so I think rather than thinking about, is the horizon straight, I and other photographers, we're looking at the frame and trying to fill it in the most pleasing fashion. So that's the simple solution. The honest solution now is that art directors are always trying to look at something that's different than what they've seen before, and honestly, sometimes they pick a crooked picture just because it's crooked. Justin Guariglia shot this picture in Kyoto, Japan. I was really annoyed with Justin when he sent these pictures in because there were 6 pictures of this gal and they were all cropped just like that. And I was thinking, Justin, come on, back up a little. Like, center the, what did you do here? And so then I started thinking about it, and Justin, for the long time, has been a student of National Geographic. Ever since he was a boy, he's looking at pictures at National Geographic, just like a lot of us, and he knows what's going on. And so he knows that about 17 or 18 years ago, that Chris Johns photographed a story for National Geographic magazine about soybeans. And the cover of National Geographic back then was the lips of a geisha with 2 chopsticks holding a little cube of tofu. And it was perfectly centered on the cover, and it was a beautiful picture. So then about 8 or 9 years ago, Jody Cobb, National Geographic photographer, did a story about geisha. And when it came time for National Geographic magazine to run her pictures, they chose a picture of a geisha's lips, and they ran it fully centered right on the cover. And I know that this is the kind of thing that Justin thinks about, that he's like, well, Chris John's picture was centered and Jody Cobb's picture was centered. I'm not going to do what they did. I'm going to shoot this picture off center, and I'm not going to do it any other way, and too bad for my photo editor. And so you know what? For this issue on the 30 Years of Traveler magazine, we chose this picture for the cover and we ran it just like that. So I can appreciate what he was thinking. It was very brave of him. Joe Patronite did this picture at Good's Barbecue. This is a great example of, I mean, this is not everybody gets to go to Kyoto or the North Pole. We called Joe Patronite. We said, hey, can you go take a picture of a barbecue sandwich? And this is what he was able to come up with. And it's just such a charming picture. He didn't get a picture of a barbecue sandwich, but of somebody eating a barbecue sandwich in just the right light with just the right background. So here we can talk a little bit about portraits. Ray Patrick did this portrait in Bali. And it has something just a little bit extra. It's charming. I really like the fact that this guy's arm is on his friend in the background. It doesn't bother me one bit that the kid in the background has got his face cut off. It's this little, what is the magic? This picture is, it's an okay picture. I mean, the reason it looks good is because people are charming in Bali and they wear charming clothes and they stick rice to their face. I mean, you know, it has all the little elements. But how do we take this? Let's take this one little more step. And so John Kernick is a photographer that is a master at doing these pictures of people. And so here's a photograph that he was doing on a neighborhood in Paris. And John is the type of photographer that when he meets somebody, he would sense something interesting about their personality. And I don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure that John asked this guy to come outside so he could get a picture of him outside his shop. And there's something, you know, Catherine Carno and I talk about this kind of situation when you find a good portrait subject and you set it up and then you wait for that subject to break. All of us can get the picture of the person standing still and staring straight into the camera. But I, in particular, like it when somebody in the background catches their attention or they get tired of me taking pictures or for whatever reason the subject breaks. Now, John is really good at these pictures where people just, everything is centered at this picture. If I were to tell you like what not to do in the picture, I would say don't take a picture vertical with the guy perfectly centered in the picture staring at the camera. As a matter of fact, our newly retired editor used to really give us a hard time about, quit showing me those pictures of people staring straight at the camera. I just don't want to see that. But he ran this picture. I don't know what it is. It's the little package. Is it the guy's body language? I want to follow him home and have lunch with him. I mean, in John's pictures, he makes you want to meet the subject of the photograph. This is one that he did in Idaho Hot Springs. And so I can tell you a little bit about why would we do a story about Idaho Hot Springs? Or how do we choose to do this story in the magazine? And so what happened here was there was a writer that sent us a pitch, and it was typewritten. And he said to us, what happens to us is now it's a Google Doc, but it used to be that writers would send in pitches, 3 or 4 paragraphs. We'd print them out. We'd put them in a box in somebody's office until the box overflows. And about every 2 months, we'd go through those stack of story ideas about this high, and we would usually choose about 2. And the writer here, P.F. Kluge, he said, there is a United States Geologic Survey pamphlet that lists the geothermally active areas in the western United States. And I propose, he said that it was like, there were people like, you know, birders have their life lists. There are hot tubbers that have their list of all the places where they wanted to visit, where there's hot springs. And so he said, I want to try to get my hands on this pamphlet and go off in search of the perfect soak. And all 6 of us in that room, we read the end of that pitch and we just said like, oh, fine, yeah, call him on the phone. Time to go. So as a photo editor, when you've got a writer wanting to do a story about that, how do you boil it down? So this pamphlet is all of the states west of the Mississippi. You can just imagine the geothermally active areas. There was like hundreds of thousands of places. How are we going to choose where to do a story? And so as photo editor, I sit down with this list and I try to find the one place with the highest concentration. And so what happened, it was the panhandle of Idaho. And so it was really, the story was contained within a small 2-county area in Idaho. Because we know that the photographers can't really just travel all over trying to get pictures. We need to be very focused. And so that's the job of a photo editor, to narrow it down, decide how to tell this whole story in the smallest possible sample. Now, photographically, what makes this picture work for me over other photographs, and what I really like is the low camera angle. The photographer lying on his belly on the dock with the camera just mere inches from the water gives this picture an import that it wouldn't have if you were simply looking down at the bather. Bob Christ will recognize this picture. This is one of the photographs when Bob wanted to go get those pictures of those Huey men in Papua New Guinea. The guys with the red and yellow paint on their face and their little wigs and the stuffed bird of paradise dangling off the back of their head. And Bob and I had a lot of conversations about, well, isn't that kind of like shooting fish in a barrel? It's like everywhere you turn, these guys are standing there at this event. The thing he did was he knew where to find them. That twice a year, I believe, they have a thing called the Highland Sing Sing, and there's this event, and if you're there that week, you'll see these guys, and isn't it wonderful? And Bob and I had a really nice conversation. I said, Bob, I want to know, what is it really like? Is this like the county theater troupe in the high school gym? You can see these people on stage, but what happened to get them there? We discussed how important it would be and how interesting it would be to kind of look behind, see what's happening off stage. And Bob had many beautiful pictures from that trip. But when we sat down to think about over the past 30 years, what pictures did we like? And there are about 3 of us that have been there this time, and we didn't even have to go look up the magazine. This picture jumped right into our head. We've got this picture of this savage holding his son. And Bob gave this picture a humanity that was exactly what I was looking for. That's the kind of pictures that we love to put in Traveler magazine. Dan Dry did this picture years ago in New Orleans. And it has a great sense of place. You'll hear me talk about this sense of place over and over again. And well, what gives it a sense of place? Well, riverboats. Where are you going to find riverboats? Probably on the Mississippi River in the United States. Where would they be? Well, you can see how wide the Mississippi River is here. So you think you must be in somewhere in Louisiana. And why not New Orleans? And so this is a very simple picture. It's a tour guide on a riverboat. But what Dan brought was that infectious laugh. Whatever he did to get a little reaction, or he saw that this tour guide was a very interesting, animated person, and that's what he captured in the photograph. That's what we want, is that one extra little bit. Dave Yoder shot this picture at Abu Dhabi. We've had conversations at Traveler magazine over the years between the photo and the word people about why would you shoot a picture with a shutter speed slow enough to blur the subject. And I love those kind of pictures, like this one, this gal, she's slightly blurred, and the editor got into this jag where he's like, why are you doing that? That's just a bad picture. And I said, well, no, think about this. This is not a photograph of that woman. This is a photograph of that mosque. And it's anonymized the woman a little bit, so it's a picture of the mosque and looking up. And what I really like is that she is blurry and she's moving, but you can still tell that she's looking up. She's looking up at the grandeur of this mosque. And so what we've taken is a person and a place and put them together to make more than a singular image. So before I show the next picture, I want to read a quote. We had asked a famous novelist, Tom Robbins, to write us about one of his most memorable travel experiences. And he talked about the Don Cesar Hotel in St. Petersburg, Florida. And he sent us this short description of what he felt. He said, "It seems to rise out of the sea, huge and rosy like Godzilla in a prom dress, pretty in pink. It's a proud relic of old Florida, the Florida that the first half of the last century sweetened the dreams and warmed the fantasies of snowbound Americans." Okay, so let's say you're a photographer and I need a picture of this and I send you this quote from Tom Robbins. What on earth are you going to take a picture of? So I called Theo Westenberger, who's sadly passed away, but she used to do a lot of work for us. And this is what Theo did. A pink bubble gum, a bathing suit. What more could you want? And the Don Cesar in the background. Catherine Carna was sent to Montreal to do a story on Montreal. And if you know anything about it, if you start to study Montreal, one of the most famous things in Montreal is the Cirque du Soleil. And so Catherine shows up in Montreal to visit the Cirque du Soleil, and she walks in and she says, oh, can I photograph the acrobats practicing their routines? And they said, sure, let's go into the gym. And she walks around in, and there's all these clowns and acrobats standing around in gray sweatsuits. And she's thinking, great, what am I supposed to do now? So she starts to ask probing questions. She starts to ask about, what do you do? How do you practice? And then somebody just sort of offhandedly mentions that, once a week, the clowns go out into the street and have a little parade just to sort of for fun and to practice. And so she manages to find out when the next one is going to happen. And she notices what's happening is that the clowns are going down the street choosing people to harass as they move along. And so just like Susan had laid down on her stomach waiting for something to happen with the surfers, Catherine started running down the street looking for patsies that she knew the clowns would come and harass. And when she got to these two bankers standing outside of their bank, it all came together. She got lucky. This is the picture that our art director loves this picture. Whenever he sits down to mock up a prototype for a new brochure or a new magazine or a book cover or something like this, he always uses this picture. I think it's just like his favorite picture ever in the whole world. I'm not sure why. What Catherine did in this picture was she was photographing a farmer's market. The story was the prettiest French village. And so she saw this farmer and his wife drove up in their car, and he was selling the flowers, and by the end of the farmer's market, she realized that what she really wanted was a portrait of this farmer and his wife in front of their car. So she asked him, would you mind? I would love, I really love the way you look. Can we take a portrait? Well, the farmer's wife, she didn't want to have too much to do with that. She wasn't really interested in having her picture taken. And so Catherine suggested to her that maybe it would be okay if she just sat in the car. And so the disappointment that Catherine first felt about her subject saying no, I think gave this picture that extra mystery. I mean, it's just so much better than if the two of them had just been standing in front of that car. And so we just need to have fun when we're out there and meet people. For me, a camera, I was always the shy kid. I would just as soon go stand facing the corner and not talk to anybody as be here in front of everyone speaking. That's just my personality. But what happened was, over the years, I love good photographs, and I love photographs of people and of places. And to me, the camera has pulled my personality and turned me inside out. It's my tool to visit the world. Without a camera, people say to me, oh, well, if you are always taking pictures of a place, you're not experiencing that place. I hate that phrase. Without a camera, I don't go anywhere. Without a camera, I don't talk to anybody. Without a camera, I don't see anybody. That's the way I am, and this is why I have the perfect job, where I get to look through the world through these photographs. Theo Westenberger was sent to Toledo, Spain, to do a photograph of what it's like to wander the streets of Toledo all night long. Salvador Dali and Louis Buñuel and all of these Dadaists had written this story about wandering the streets all night long, staying up all night and harassing people. And we had a writer that wanted to have that experience. So you can imagine Theo's horror when she shows up on a weekday and finds out that the lights that are normally on the cathedral are not on. And she can't find the person in Toledo, Spain, who seems to have the key to the door behind which is the switch to turn the lights of the city on, which are not scheduled to come on until Saturday night, and she won't be there anymore. So her solution was to use infrared film. And I think it worked even better. And the lightning, well, that was just a little extra bit of luck. Macduff Everton shoots a lot of pictures for us, and he told us about Kerala, India, which is this place where they use the old rice barges, which are no longer used to transport rice, but they've been turned into, well, call them RVs, if you will. But you can rent one of these barges and a guy to cook for you and somebody to pull it down the river and spend one of the most relaxing weeks of your life. And so Macduff is the master of this panoramic format. And this is a picture that just makes you feel so peaceful and want to have a ride on that boat. Pablo Corral brought us this picture from the Torres del Paine. We've all seen these beautiful pictures of Torres del Paine shot in the perfect light with the alpenglow hitting them off in the distance. And when Pablo was there, he didn't have that perfect light. Every time the twilight came, the mountains, the towers of Paine were hidden behind the clouds, and he kind of had to do his picture in the middle of the day. And he realized in the middle of the day, he could get his own picture. In the middle of the day, this lake became the blue that it's not at twilight. He shot this shot of this gal walking up the dock, and it ended up on the cover of the magazine. So what more could he want? This photograph was by Jeff Pingree. I don't know Jeff Pingree. He was the winner of our photo contest about 4 years ago with this photograph. This photograph was shot with a Sony 6-megapixel point-and-shoot camera. And this picture, more than anything else, when the art directors and photo editors sat down and started talking about what photos are we going to choose as our favorites from the last 30 years, every single one of us mentioned this photograph. Our job is to find pictures of tourist places, places where everybody goes, places where everybody's already shot a picture. How do you make it a little bit different? And when we were judging the photo contest on this year, to look at this picture of these actors acting out the part of a painting in the museum, but I really like to look at these pictures and these visitors to the museum in the background. What are they thinking about? What are they looking at? Look at that gal in the middle. She's not quite too sure about the whole situation. But what really elevated this picture and what made this picture stick out in our minds? And for me, it always comes back to the light. And the fact that this picture was taken at that exact moment when that actress turned her face up to the light, and it just bathed her in this wonderful glow. And I also want to applaud. This is like a picture taken by an ordinary amateur photographer standing in the same place as everybody else. I bet like half the people in that museum had cameras in their hands, and Jeff is the one that got this picture. Ed Cashy was doing a story on Jerusalem. This goes back to just like the picture of the mosque. Jerusalem is one of these places where it's very difficult. There's a lot of conflict there. And so once again, he chose to use a person to humanize the picture, but let that person be a little bit blurry because it's a picture about the place. And then once again, I can make fun of the crooked horizon, but tilting your camera a little bit, it just helps take the picture, make it a little off-putting. It gives attention to the picture, attention that is appropriate when you're shooting a picture of Jerusalem. We asked Catherine Carno to go do a story on Vienna, Austria, and she was really excited to go see the Spanish riding school where they have the Le Panzer stallions, you know, those stallions that can somehow jump like 4 feet up in the air. And so she called the Spanish riding school, and she wanted to find out when their performances were for the summer because she was going to be there in July. And they told her, well, we're sorry, but the horses are on vacation. They will be up in the alpine valleys eating the fresh grass and taking a break until the performing season. And so Catherine called, and she was crushed. Dan, what am I going to do? Her photo editor at the time was Carol Enquist, and Carol Enquist came over to me. She's like, Dan, this is a big problem. Catherine says she can't photograph the horses, and it's the most important thing in Vienna. Catherine can get attached to things, I will tell you. And she wants to go 50 miles away from Vienna to take a picture of them at the Spanish riding school summer farm because, and I said, no, she's not going up there. This is a story about Vienna, not about the horses. Why doesn't she just go by and get a picture of what's going on there? And so I like to think of this as Catherine's picture of the barn at the Spanish riding school. Sawdust on the floor. I mean, that's just the fanciest barn I have ever seen. Here's another take on a picture in Jerusalem. Alex Avakian shot this photograph. I'd be the first to say that the best first thing you should do for good composition is your photographs is to not put the main subject in the middle of the photo. But then I just love this photo. Sometimes you can't explain why. This has all of these things I've been talking about. It's got the centered subject. It's got an interesting background. It's got the objects, a huge 2 people in the foreground, massively out of focus. But it still works for me. I think it's just because the way that, well, one, the crown, and the way the girl has turned her head. And so these are the Ethiopian Coptic Christians having their pre-Easter ceremony. Now, the other thing I like about this picture is sort of the unsaid thing, is that you see this dome in the background. So supposedly there is a piece of the cross in there. I don't know if it's really there or not, but I like to think about that. Pete McBride came to us, and he pulled a 5-peso bill out of his pocket. And he unfolded it, and he said, "This is the mother of the Mexican Revolution, Dolores. And my great-grandpa tells me that she's my great-grandmother 5 times removed." And we're like, "Oh, really?" And he said, "So I want to go to Mexico and find out if it's true." Now, so we're, once again, just like I want to go in search of a perfect soak, we said, have a good time. Let us know what you find out. And so I get this frantic call from Pete. He's in the Hall of Records I think he was in San Miguel de Allende. And he was in Dolores. And he's going through the genealogy, these old crinkly books. They don't have this stuff computerized in Mexico yet. And he said, "Dan, I was looking at Dolores' family tree, and there are 9 branches. And this guy, David here, he's telling me, yeah, there's a 10th branch in America that think they're related, but they're not." And he wanted to come back home with his tail between his legs because he thought he blew this story, that he was really going to deliver us this promise. And I said, "Pete, what are you talking about? That's more interesting than if she actually was your grandmother." And so then the picture, once again, this is a story about colonial Mexico. It's a story about a gal at a rodeo in a colonial outfit. Does it bother me that you don't get to see her face? Not one bit. This is a picture of the hat. And by choosing the composition to show just her hat and her dress, he also lets us focus on this guy in the background and his sidelong glance. He's giving us a more interesting picture. So for those of you that have lived or spent a lot of time in a small town, I grew up in a small town, quite often there'll be a coffee shop. And behind the counter at the coffee shop will be all the mugs with the locals' initials. So when you come to the coffee shop, you get your mug and they fill it with coffee, and there you go. And you can see how delighted I was to find out that in Hot Springs, Arkansas, the locals have their own initials on their loofah sponges. And so every one of those sponges belonged to somebody who would come and take their soak in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Dileep Mehta shot this picture for us in India. I think you can sense this theme going here, that I love pictures that have 2 things or more going on at once. Really, you have 2 pictures. In the foreground is this young boy looking on in wonder to this background of the statue of Ganesha. This is a matter of the photographer walking in and looking at the subject and then making a conscious choice to turn around and take a few steps away, look at it from a further distance, and see if it might be a more interesting picture. Aaron Huey shot this picture in the South Pacific of a diver collecting black pearls. It's just, he gave us a view of something that most of us probably don't think actually happens. He went to a pearl farm. Beautiful. Dave Harvey showing us a picture of a girl's first communion. I don't know what it is with the baby Jesus and the neon frame. But it really just adds, once again, a photographer like David would find some disconcerting element in the scene and camp himself there until something extra happened. This is the way we work. A lot of standing around, waiting around till things come together. Karl Hoffman was a writer who called us with a story idea. And he said, "My family inherited mineral rights in eastern Montana. And so we get this royalty check every few months for $6, $12. We're not really sure what it's about, but I would like to go find out what the royalty checks are for." And so he got to go off to a travel destination that most people wouldn't go. And what we were trying to do was underscore that sometimes travel, it's great to not just go to all the famous places where people travel, but go for your own reason to your own place. So you can imagine the horror for the photographer when they get there and they find out that the mineral rights is a little tin shack that looks like an outhouse about this high. And you open the door and inside there's a valve. And that was the mineral rights. And so Aaron Huey, the photographer, had to back up and say, okay, well, I'm not going to get a picture of that. So let's see what else we could find. And this story was a real turning point, I think, for the way in Traveler magazine that we visually communicate, because it was so easy for us to show the same pictures that people show over and over again. But Aaron needed to find real America and try to illustrate this picture. And so this is senior night at Glasgow, Montana football game. And it really has not a lot to do with travel as we normally think of it, but it has to do with getting out to see the world and make it important to ourselves. But that being said, I will tell you that Barry Lewis shot this wonderful picture of the old guys playing chess in Budapest, Hungary. And so this picture is about 25 years old. And then, Bob, have you been there? So then for National Geographic magazine, I think it might have been Carrie Walensky, had a picture of this same place about 15 years ago. And about 7 years ago, Catherine Carnow, she went and she brought us this picture of this same swimming pool. So we do need to make travel about ourselves, but it's also kind of fun to go back and see what other people did and update those pictures. So this is a selection of my favorite pictures from the last 30 years, and I hope you guys liked them, and hopefully you can see what the thinking is behind why we choose the pictures that go in the magazine. Thanks for listening to me this morning.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.